Okay, I'm going to go straight to table, and again, I'm trying to bring in some tables. I may not have asked the question already. So table 2, if I can go to Marcus.
Just a question for Justin Kelly. Does the adult caution scheme enhance the sense of impunity that one can be caught with drugs and be seen to get away with it?
Thanks for the question. No, I wouldn't say so. I think it's important, the adult caution scheme, just to say that it isn't a given. Every one of those is individually considered, and there's a number of factors in it. For example, the person has to admit the offence. We consider a number of factors with it. So I wouldn't say that. And I mean, like I said in my presentation, you know, one of our things that we're keen to do is to divert people away from the criminal justice system. So I wouldn't say that. And the thing about the caution, it's taken seriously, as in you have to come into the Garda station, and it's someone of a rank not below of inspector. So it's a senior guard that gives you that caution. So it's not just you're written out and you're told you're getting a caution. There is a bit to it. So I wouldn't agree with that. I don't know, Ben, would you?
Yeah, just a minute on that as well. In relation to the adult caution, as it's currently operated as well, it's only available to people once. So you only get one shot at it. Now, we are looking at whether that could be rolled out to a higher number, a set higher number, but at the moment it's only once, so you do only at the moment get that one shot.
Thanks, guys. Table 14, Abigail. I think it might be a question for Eamon, but Abigail, please. Table 14.
Good morning. Thank you so much for all the talks. They were really great, and we hope we see more of them. Our question here was for Professor Keenan. We're just wondering about the distribution of the methadone treatment facilities, like what's the distribution countrywide? And also, these facilities, is it just a treatment center, or do they have beds and inpatient care or things like that? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. So, the slide identifies that we have 93 HSE clinics operating throughout the country. So they're a mixture between dispensing clinics, whereby we will have a clinic where there will be a full multidisciplinary team in place, and the individual comes to that initially on a daily basis, and they get their methadone or buprenorphine dispensed on site. And as they stabilise, they can get takeaways, and you know, they can move forward. And sometimes people end up only going once a week. And at that stage, we might look at transferring that person out to a general practitioner. So some of the other clinics then are smaller affairs where we would go into a specific area maybe 2 or 3 times a week, write a prescription, and that's then dispensed at a local community pharmacy. So the split in terms, the majority of them would be in Dublin, but it's about 70-30, I suppose, 70%, 30% in Dublin, outside Dublin. And in terms of a geographical spread, there's a couple of areas where we have limited clinics, but we rely on general practitioner prescribing within those areas.
Thank you, Eamon. Thanks. Table 3. Sorry, actually, table 5. Have I called in Averick, table 5, please? It might be for Siobhan.
Is it possible to have effective drug consumption rooms without decriminalising drugs?
Could you just repeat again? I think it's for Siobhan, please, Averick.
Yeah, I'm not sure who, but is it possible to have effective drug consumption rooms without decriminalising drugs?
I'll take that one, yes. So thanks for the question. So supervised injection facilities are legislated for under the Misuse of Drugs Act, and we're currently now at the phase of implementing one such supervised injection facility in the Dublin area. So that's a location whereby drug users who need to inject can do so safely, but also in a location that there won't be a focus on coming into the criminal justice system. So the HSE and the An Garda Síochána will work really closely with the site providers to ensure that that kind of system is put in place there.
Thank you, Siobhan.
Yeah. Well, just
go ahead, Eamon.
So just on that, I mean, we've been through a process in relation to the supervised injecting facility, a planning process which has gone on for a period of time, but it's only, I suppose, just earlier this year, last month, that we got approval for it to actually go ahead. So that's when the detailed discussions between the HSE An Garda Síochána and the service provider will work out how it's going to operate. But as Siobhan says, it will be legal for the person to be in possession of drugs while they're in that facility.
Thank you. Table 8, Ilana. I think this might be a question for Ben. No, it's going to come out.
Yes, I thank you for all that information you provided us with. Ben, you spoke specifically about the search and legalisation around searching people. So if we were to recommend decriminalising or depenalising, how exactly does that affect the power to search that's already there in the legislation?
Yeah, I mean, and Justin might come in on this as well. Essentially, and this is what the Sheehan Group found, when they looked into this, if you decriminalise person in possession, then if you form the view that someone who has drugs on them has them only for personal possession, you would no longer be entitled to search them because it's no longer an offence. So it would only be if you suspected that they intended to supply them at that stage that you could search. So that's that potential loophole, and the other issue I raised of gangs getting their dealers to carry smaller quantities as well, so that in essence they wouldn't appear to have an intent to supply, but they may have only personal possession. So that's the difficulty it gives rise to in relation to searches. Depenalisation is currently, like all of the measures that we've mentioned are essentially depenalisation measures around adult caution, around health diversion, you know, that there's a different outcome rather than a criminal justice penalty. For yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah.
So you're only depenalising it once?
At the moment, yeah. I mean, as I said, we are considering whether there's scope to increase it to a higher set number of offences, but at the moment it only applies to the first offence, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Justin, if you want to make any comment too.
Thanks, Chair. What I would just add to answer your question is the power of search for us comes under something called Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act, and it is a really important power for us. It's a really important tool that we use on a daily basis, and not just for people, say, specifically working in drugs units or Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau that I referenced earlier. A lot of the frontline guards that you will see every day outside, they utilise that power. So, of course, anything that would diminish that power would concern us in Garda Síochána.
And can I just come in as well, just in relation to that, in the health diversion scheme, the first referral doesn't involve an adult caution. So whenever the health referral programme is up and running, the guard will make the referral to the health service, but there will not be an adult caution associated with that referral. It's on the second occasion there will be an adult caution.
Thank you. Can I ask table 3? I think it's Una, if I haven't called you already. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks everybody for your interesting presentations. We have a question directed towards both the Assistant Commissioner and the Department of Justice spokesperson here as well. We're keen to know, what is the breakdown of Garda resources and spending used on tackling the organised crime gangs versus prosecuting drug users and those caught in possession?
Okay, so I suppose, and you would have heard in my presentation, our whole focus isn't on the someone who's addicted to drugs and those possession cases. Our whole focus is on the people who supply the drugs, and everything that I spoke about and the seizures that I spoke about and the firearms and the drugs, they're all what we call intelligence-led operations. So, and I'm sure you're all wise people around the room. You all know that we just don't stumble across those cases. So there's huge amounts of work put behind all those cases. So the vast majority, to answer your question, the vast majority of our resources working in drugs is all that higher end. So it's all around the supply lines, the people supplying, the people higher up on the chain. So we do not spend a lot of resources focused on the possession users. Now, possession users will come into contact, obviously, with members of Garda Síochána. All my frontline colleagues would regularly deal with users of controlled drugs who would be involved in a variety of crimes that I outlined in the presentation. And of course, An Garda Síochána is a 247 agency, so we deal with people where there's overdoses, we deal with domestic violence where there's drugs related to that, we deal with all the drugs related to intimidation. So, but like I said, to answer your question, the vast majority of all our drugs units, our national units, it's all on those people higher up the food chain, if you want to describe them like that.
Thank you. Next question is a really interesting one, and it'll probably call in each of the panellists, so I'll ask you all to be very brief. But Rebecca on table 4 has a really good question, which we might pose to all panellists in future.
Thank you. To each of the panellists, should time permit, if you could choose 1 or 2 measures to come out of this assembly, what would those be?
Nice and brief, folks.
From a health-led approach, I suppose one of the things that would be really important is that population-based funding, and that we are sufficiently allocating funding to meet the demands of services. So we do know that we need to be supporting not just our statutory health services, but our community and voluntary services to be more in the prevention and intervention space. So I think it's sufficient funding, but it's also the health diversion pathway. It's moving people into that health-led approach and beginning to support communities to tackle those social determinants of health. I've answered that as multiple questions, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I didn't think I'd get a second opportunity to make a pitch for resources, but you've given that to me, so thanks very much. And I think, as Siobhan says, that if we are looking at really investing in the health diversion and a health-led approach, it is going to mean that more people are going to be coming in to health services, both at a statutory and a community level, and that does need to be resourced. I mean, I suppose one of the slides I put up showed that we had a tripling in people presenting for cocaine treatment over the last 6 years. We didn't necessarily get a tripling in our budget for that. We got money last year for cocaine, so an investment in multi-annual ongoing resources to support the health-led approach that we are advocating for, and we hope that you will support that as well.
Thanks, Eamon. What I would say is the problems that we have around drugs aren't single issues. So for us, and you might be surprised to hear me say this, I really think we need more resources around the homeless issue, around addiction, around mental health, because they are the causes of a lot of the drugs addiction and the people that we meet on a 24-hour basis. So for definite, for me, I would see we need more resourcing around all those areas, and education as well. And again, I reference back to my presentation, you know, for us in An Garda Síochána, we see there's a fundamental disconnect between some people who use drugs and the connection back to those organised criminal groups and the violence that they use to enforce their businesses. And in fact, even further than that, there's a huge disconnect between people who use drugs and the damage that does in other countries. And we know from our liaison officer that I spoke of over in Bogota in Colombia, people cannot believe the damage that has been done to their country, both environmentally and to their structures and democracy, and that people in Europe do not seem to care one little bit about that. So for me, that disconnect between people who use drugs and those consequences, I think, are really important. And you know, there's definitely, in my view, an education piece for that.
Thank you. It's hard to follow all that. From my point of view, I suppose, given the extensive consultations you're going to undertake, the amount of voices you're going to hear from and different opinions, what I'd hope to get out of this is a sense of whether the measures that we're currently taking or about to embark on, whether there's a view that they are going to help people, whether to help people with addiction issues, help wider society to feel safe. Is the kind of current depenalisation initiatives that we're looking at the moment, are they considered to be the right ones when you've heard views from a whole number of sections of society? So if we get a sense of that, I think you'd be doing very well. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. You're well put on the spot there and well responded. Much appreciated. It was very clear. And Justin's reference to Colombia, I think, was important just in terms of, as he described it, unintended consequences for other jurisdictions. We will have a presentation from Colombia specifically at one of the next assemblies, so you get a good sense of their view as well, as Justin has just shared some of it. Can I call in table 9, and it's in. It's a question related to ADHD and autism, but drug related as well, and it might be for Siobhan and indeed Eamon, I think.
Hello, this is a question for Ms. Schwan and Mr. Eamon. I represent a group of people who have autism and ADHD problem, and this is a genetic problem, and it's easily to develop mental problem, and it's highly correlated to criminal rate and drug use disorder. So my question is, among all the support that we talked about yesterday and today about homeless, about mother-child and preventions, we didn't hear much from the actual group that requires help. So, because yesterday we talked a lot about the traumas that cause the mental problem, may cause the drug use disorder, but not all the mental problems are caused by trauma. Some are genetic issues. May I ask if the HSE has been working on early diagnose some of these psychiatrist genetic problem that to prevent mental health, developing mental health, prevent, as in criminal, prevention of crime and prevent of drug abuse before it goes too far. Also, how do the Irish Society support ADHD and ASD group, and how do we increase the social awareness of this community? Thank you.
Thank you, Zane, and thank you for getting 9 questions in to get our one to So I'll pass across to Siobhan.
I'll start. So you've raised a number of really interesting questions there. So my policy brief also includes mental health services, and we work very closely with our colleagues in disability services, addressing those issues that you've raised around early intervention, early diagnosis, and early supports for families and young people who are, with developmental conditions such as autism or ADHD. And one of the things that we're very focused on, say, through our CAM services, which is the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service, is around supporting young children and young people. Not every young person with the diagnosis of autism or ADHD is going to have struggles through their teenage years and early adulthood, but some do, and we're really focused on improving access, funding to our mental health services, and improving early access so people who are having struggles or challenges don't face the same waiting times that they have in the past. We also work really closely with the National Educational Psychological Service, so supporting the psychology service in our primary schools and in our secondary schools, supporting young people, because often times it's their peers and their teachers who may recognise if there are challenges. In terms of the medication, I'm not the expert, so I'm going to pass it over to Eamon on that one.
So it's a fairly broad question, and I think from the HSE perspective and from addiction, we'd sort of been a section within the HSE that hadn't been dealing with a lot of the other sections, but I think over time that is changing, and I think one of the points I mentioned was the dual diagnosis programme that is operating now between mental health and social inclusion, whereby we're not going to silo people into either mental health or an addiction service. We're going to look at it in a broader sense and have that service to support people who are suffering from problems that you describe in terms of ADHD in some ways, but that's also within disability. So there's a number of sections within the HSE that'll cover that, and I think that it's by communicating with those sections that we'll move forward. Was there a question about medication? No?
Don't encourage any more.
No,
Careful.
actually.
Sorry.
No, actually,
okay.
yes, no, yes and no, but I think the medication is a different topic that we can talk about because, like, I suppose there are two parts of the medication problem. One is the addictive use of any type of drug. The other part of the concerning is the ADHD medication that could be.
Because I know it's something you're passionate about. We could have a discussion just offline with Eamon and something we can bring into the June meeting as well.
Sorry, one last.
Oh, hey, for God's sake.
Sorry, one last question is I know earlier on Siobhan had been talking about the campus had been aware that kids are having these conditions, but a lot of them don't really make it to education and at least some higher education.
I think that's a comment more than a question.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Zin. But I think you got more time than the presenters put together there, so well done. I just use the chair's prerogative and just ask a very brief question that might be on some people's minds, but you referenced, Ben, in the Sheehan report that legislation will be needed to strengthen the health-led approach, and the original intention was to go for Health Act, and the intention now is the criminal justice approach. Where's that at? How long is it going to take? When might we expect that legislation, and what will be better?
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Yeah, so initially, because most of the legislation is covered in the Misuse of Drugs Act, that was where the initial focus was, and obviously that's our colleagues in the Department of Health own that legislation. We were trying to feed into that. It became very complicated to try and amend that act in a way that would allow for this health diversion approach. So in the more recent months, we've taken a different tack. We're devising a scheme, and we have got government approval to draft the scheme, which will allow a minister, other than the Minister of Justice, to devise a scheme to divert people away from the criminal justice system for specified reasons. So one of those is in relation to drugs, as we're talking here. There's also one around mental health, where mental health is the primary reason behind certain kinds of low-level offending as well. So that's what is going to be involved in the scheme. There will be a permission for another minister, so in this case the Minister for Health, to come up with a scheme as to what's involved in the health intervention, and what are, the reason why it needs legislation is there has to be some consequence if you don't partake in that opportunity to avail of whatever the health diversion is. Otherwise we could just operate a non-statutory scheme, but because there has to be some consequence flowing from failure to participate in it, that's why it needs legislation. So the government permission has been obtained quite recently. Now we just need to find an act that can accommodate it, or a bill, that can accommodate it. So at some stage this year it will be slotted into a piece of legislation, and then how long that takes will be dependent on how long it takes to go through the Oireachtas, and we've no control over that. Obviously that's in the hands of the politicians.
Thanks, Ben. I think it is. We might get some more detail on that later, because if there is some legislation planned, let's try to get behind what might be the benefits, and also how does it compare with other administrations and legislation change. I'm going to draw this discussion now to a close, if that's all right. I think we've had really good policy presentations, strategy presentations, and I guess practical implementation from two of the key biggest agencies in the state in terms of the HSE and Garda Síochána. So I'd like to thank the four panellists and appreciate if you can show your appreciation for them presenting today.